Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench. Hello there, sorry to interrupt. I wanted to let you know that you can now join our supporting cast over on Patreon. As thanks for your support, you'll be able to help us pick films, submit questions for guests, have first pick on brand new and exclusive merch, and much more. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show. Hello and welcome back to Fighting on Film. We continue Merc Month 2. Harder.
Merc harder.
Before we launch into this week's film, we have to say a massive thank you to everyone listening, because we've actually hit 200,000 downloads of the pod.
Yay, yeah, it's amazing news. I think we got it on, I think it just tipped over on Friday night, was it?
Yes, I think it was.
Saturday night. Yeah,
You
it was
spotted
really
it.
nice. I did, yeah. I was just doing some tinkering and I was like, oh, hang on, we've just hit a milestone. So thanks, everyone. This means a lot.
Yeah, huge.
And thanks to everyone who supports the show on Patreon and everyone who likes and shares and leaves reviews. It means a lot to us.
It all helps.
Yeah, it does. And this week's movie is one of those sorts of movies where I feel like we're doing everyone a service, having watched it for everyone.
Well, yes, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of background to how we plan these episodes. So we planned Merc Month 2 about 2 months in advance, month in advance over Christmas. This was a sort of toss-up between, there was a couple of other movies in the running, and we put most of those other movies in the running in the Patreon vote, and Ronin won that, so that's this month's Patreon movie. But Universal Soldier was something that we'd only really watched the first, half an hour of.
I hadn't watched any of it.
Planning meetings.
Hold my hand
Matt
up.
put his hand. It's my fault, really. I'd watched the first half hour.
I watched the trailer.
Yeah. And I was like, okay,
Rob
this looks
suggested
good.
it.
George Lazenby.
We should do this.
Firearms. It looks fantastic.
Yeah.
And then we sat down and watched it. So all will become apparent as we move on. It's still a mercenary movie. It still counts.
Oh, yes. Definitely.
I think it might be one of the least action-heavy films we've done.
It's fascinating, though.
Considering the genre. Yeah, it's really interesting.
It's fascinating. You can't say it's not fascinating.
It's not, and everything about this movie is really interesting. And maybe you should just start with production, because how this movie comes about is fascinating in its own right.
So, what is this film about? So, basically,
what is this fucking film about?
Yeah, tricky. In a nutshell, George Lazenby plays Ryker, who is a mercenary. He's been out of the game for about 2 years, but he's been drawn back in, probably with the lure of a big payout.
Yeah.
And he is contracted to essentially help a deposed African leader purchase arms and then go to Africa and train a counter-revolutionary or revolutionary army to take back control of the unnamed African country, which is, par for the course, 60s, 70s. We know the turmoil in Africa. So it's a completely legitimate story. Makes a lot of sense. But then Lazenby's character has a sort of transformational epiphany. He's suffering from PTSD. He has flashbacks. There's one.
Ryker.
And essentially he decides, I don't want to be a mercenary anymore, and decamps to the hippie end of London.
The hippie house, yeah. I likened it. It's to explain it to ourselves while we were watching this together. I likened it to the bit in Serpico where he finds his second girlfriend and he goes with all the intellectual set, and the movie stops being about undercover cops for 40 minutes. It really it feels like that.
Yeah, so George goes house hunting, rents a little flat, meets a very young lady, and they have a relationship, and then he's all the this takes place over what seems to be a week. And in
a couple of days, it's a bit.
The other mercenaries are still organizing this operation, and he gets drawn back in. They're like, "We need you. You can't,
You can't just fuck
you
off. You
can't
can't
just
just
become a
sod off.
hippie in the
No.
middle of this." Um, and basically George goes, "Okay, I'll come back." And then with his friend, he organizes or decides to steal the weapons and hold them to ransom to make some money, but never intend to give them back to the
Yeah.
mercenaries, which is
Yeah.
never a good idea. You
No.
know, mercenaries getting
Such a
separated
bad
from their,
idea.
you know,
Yeah.
the hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of small arms that they've just bought from an amazing arms dealer, which we'll talk about in a moment. Never a good plan, George.
Bit of a weird one.
I won't spoil the ending just yet, but you know what there is of it.
Yeah.
But that's basically the gist of the plot. So let me go into production, then Rob can handle the cast.
Regale us with the amazing production of this movie.
Oh my God, Rob! Yeah. So directed by Cy Endfield, who is the revered director of Zulu, which we all know and love. He'd been blacklisted by the House of Un-American Activities as a communist in 1951, so moved to the UK, made lots of adventure films and thrillers. And then later on, he wrote the book Zulu Dawn, which eventually he co-adapted into the film Zulu Dawn in 1979.
Yep.
And he has a cameo in this, doesn't he, Rob?
Yeah, he plays. I'll mention it in my cast, but he plays a guy that it's even mad. So this is stuff you never expect to say in a mercenary movie. He plays a man that Ryker rents a flat off.
Yeah, basically.
Bizarre.
Endfield worked on the screenplay, what there is of it, with Lazenby, Kevin Duggan, Duggan and Kenneth Furman. I couldn't find anything about those two guys. I don't know who they are.
Right.
But it feels like a lot of this was made up on the spot, ad-libbed, and then
improvisation.
Some of it was most definitely done post-production is ADR. Added audio. The story is based on something that was concocted by Joseph Massot, who was a director, and Derek Marlowe, who was a writer. He did plays and some TV crime shows later on in the 70s and 80s. But I mean, in terms of plot and the actual screenplay, there isn't a lot here. And the lore around the film is that Endfield and Lazenby shopped around a spec script short, like a pitch script, which involved gun running and mercenaries to producers, which got the film initially funded.
Yeah, like more standard fare, which would have been perfect for Lazenby coming off of Bond. Like we need to talk about the fact that he quits Bond to essentially do this movie.
I think you could say he's already sort of like made the mental decision that he doesn't want to be Bond anymore, and then this is the film that is best out the gate with.
This is his first foray after. I mean, I think it's bizarre that you turned down Bond anyway. I think you could have done both. I think you could have had much like Daniel Craig's done. You can have a career parallel to Bond. You don't have to just be Bond.
Different back in the day, I suppose. I know that Sean Connery didn't want to be in that role forever as well.
No, I understand
so
that. But
anyway, we'll talk about that in a moment when we get to cast.
Yeah.
So in terms of production, it seems like they wrote this script, but they had no intention of sticking to it. And it seems that Lazenby and Endfield envisaged it as a series of like vignettes with this transformational main character arc, and you know the prevailing narrative of it is that he has an epiphany and doesn't want to be a mercenary anymore. And that stands in for a plot which, you know, the plot in the film often seems like half forgotten or unwritten,
half baked
places. But basically the intention to stick to whatever script was originally pitched
wasn't there,
was well out the door. Lazenby himself, in an interview later on in 2012 with filming, said, we did it as we went along. There was a script, but we didn't follow it. And we were smoking a lot of wacky tobacco.
I think he's honest.
Yeah. So, I mean, George has done more interviews about this film than he has films at this point.
Probably, yeah.
which is incredible. Anyway, let me finish out with
Sure
production.
thing.
So cinematography was by Tony Imi, who did North Sea Hijack in 1979
Great film.
and The Sea Wolves in 1980, as well as The Night Crossing in 1982, which is about crossing the Iron Curtain, and Inside the Reich in the same year. So interesting career. Lots of other famous films that you'd know. So he's worth checking out on IMDb or Wikipedia or wherever. But it's really competently shot. The film, there's lots of Dutch angles. There's nice panning shots. It's more than competent, and it's watchable. Some of the moody sequences with George walking through London are pretty cool. There's some nice shots through windows. There's interesting stuff going on.
Definitely.
In terms of filmmaking, it's not a bad movie.
Yeah, as a piece of cinema, it's okay, but the plot lets it down. The execution is
it's like an extended mood piece. It's weird. Music was provided by Philip Goodhand Tate, who was a music producer and musician. And he seems to have done an entire soundtrack that riffs off like current music. Like there's a little bit of like early prog. There's some like blues elements to it. There's little bits of like psychedelic stuff going on, and there's melodies picked out of popular songs. I think there's certain things that you hear and you go, is that? And it's not.
Yeah, I thought it was Rod Stewart at the start, but it's not.
Yeah. There's that first song does have like a little like Rod Stewart with Jeff Beck or that era, like the very early Rod Stewart. Production wise, it was financed by Appaloosa Pictures. But it seems like that at some point in the production, some more funding was needed, and a company called Ionian stumped up another £10,000. Overall, the budget is mostly discussed in various sources as about £300,000, which is fairly moderate, and it's not minuscule, but it's not huge.
Yeah. It's not the 8 million that On Her Majesty's Secret Service was done for.
No,
this is a completely different type of movie.
Yeah, this is like shoestring compared to a big budget Bond picture in the late
the catering budget for that movie almost.
Yeah, probably. That's what you get when you film like in Switzerland.
I know, right? Yeah.
But apparently the cast have fed their fees. Lazenby probably put some money in, I believe.
Yeah.
All sorts of little bits like that. So it's a really interesting tale of how the film got made.
Yeah,
it's an indie film. It's an early indie film. Yeah, that's definitely true. I couldn't find any figures on how it did box office wise.
It flopped. I read in an Australian
I've read
newspaper.
It's flopped, but I couldn't find any mention of figures or anything like that.
It probably did make its 300 grand back. I'll just quickly do the one word reviews this week. So we had Dave Bowen said, and he didn't put any spaces, so it's one word. Not the one with Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren then. No, definitely.
God, I wish it was.
Definitely, buddy, not this week. Yeah, I wish it would have been. I know.
I never thought I'd say that either.
I know, right? And David Patterson goes
Universal Soldier Month. There's like 6 of those movies,
Christ. Yeah. Where does this fit in the universe? David Patterson went with Avis, and Brian Williams went with Macho. Lazenby looks macho. There we go.
What did I go with, Rob? I went
you went with frisbee.
I did. Yeah.
You went with frisbee. Amazing.
So yeah, Rob, do you want to handle cast, and then we can talk about this in a bit more depth? Yeah.
So as we've mentioned, George Lazenby is your main star. He plays Ryker, the mercenary, and he's an Australian actor. He rose to fame. He was an adult model. Sorry, he was a male model. Slip of the tongue. So he was a male model before he rose to fame on Her Majesty's Secret Service, and then took over from Sean Connery in 1969. In the wake of that, he turned down 3 more Bond films, which would have started with The Diamonds Are Forever, and he chose to do this movie. I think his agent talked him into it, saying that in the 70s no one's going to want to watch Bond. It's all going to be about counterculture, and movies like this are going to be popular. Totally. And I don't know if George was, he listened to his agent too much, or he felt it as well.
His agent was in the film, so maybe he did.
Yeah, maybe he did, yeah. I wouldn't say he has a bad career. I just think it never hits the heights that it could have if he'd stayed as Bond. But he might have. He's obviously got his own reasons for not pursuing Bond. But he later appears in a 1983 made-for-TV film, Return from the Man from U.N.C.L.E., playing a character called JB. I'll leave you guessing what those initials stand for. And he appears in multiple TV and film roles. He goes and does some Australian work back home. He appears in a Brian Trenchard Smith adventure film, which if you're a fan of the show, you remember he directed Siege of Firebase Gloria.
Yeah.
And he's one of his few military credits. He plays Brigadier General Johnston Pettigrew in 1993's Gettysburg.
Oh, really? Of course he does. Yeah.
Yes.
So there we go. He's fine in that. He's pretty decent.
Yeah, and now you'll find George on the the Comic Con circuit talking about Bond and doing the Comic Con. So I don't think Bond's been unkind to him in his career. I think he's still done quite well out of it, and I know people now consider Lazenby's portrayal of Bond quite good.
I like it. I rate that. I rate the film he did as Bond.
Me too.
I enjoy it. I think it's quite refreshing what he brought to the role. I don't understand why certain people at the time didn't like it. I don't get that.
Sean Connery, isn't it? It's always going to be that
Connery
thing.
is iconic as Bond, obviously. But I thought if anyone's going to follow like Connery, why not pick an outlandish, suave Australian?
It's the argument that we have with replacing Moore with Lewis Collins. It's that Lewis Collins argument. Do you have a rough and tumble, straight edge Bond, or do you have a suave, sophisticated Bond? And there's arguments for both, but that's Lazenby's career in a nutshell. So then we move on to the secondary characters, and it's really unfair to the cast here because they don't have a lot to do. Really,
no, they don't.
The plot meanders so much, and there's not many scenes where people are actually having conversations and actually driving the plot forward. It just sort of just moves along itself. It's a bit unfair to this cast, really. But anyway, so Ben Carruthers plays Jesse. He's an American actor. You'll probably recognize him from The Dirty Dozen. He played Gilpin, one of the dozen. He also appeared in Anthony Quinn's Swashbuckler, A High Wind in Jamaica in 1965. And his first uncredited role was as a sentry in 1958's The Beast of Budapest, about the Hungarian Revolution. In 1956, a Hollywood movie there. And he passed away just before his, in his late 40s. He's 47 in 1983, so that's a bit of a shame. Then we have Robin Hunter playing Bradshaw. He was another British character actor, appears in like Carry On Matron, Richard Lionheart series, and then Up Pompeii. Then you have Rudolph Walker as Mboti, the African leader. And
he's probably like the second most famous film.
Probably second most famous
person in this, isn't he?
Yeah, or third most famous, really.
Yeah, maybe third.
Or second, depends where you live, I guess. But he's probably, internationally, well, internationally, no, but known throughout.
He had an incredible like 70s, 80s career, and then he did a lot of TV in the 90s and stuff. Anyway, carry on, Rob. But
that's all right. Don't worry. So he's in the Thin Blue Line sitcom, but he's probably best known in the UK for playing Patrick Truman on EastEnders from 2001. Really recognisable face. Then we have Guy Deggy as Timmerman. He's the right-hand man of the arms dealer. He's a Hungarian-born actor. He played the ship's captain in March or Die. He was King George V in Winston Churchill: The Wilderness Years. He played an uncredited major in Where Eagles Dare, and he had small roles in Operation Crossbow, Carve a Name of Pride, and The Steel Bayonet, and Cold It Story. So a real bit part character actor there. Then we have Edward Judd, who plays Rawlings, the American arms dealer. He has a leading role in The Day the Earth Caught Fire, playing Peter Stenning in 1961, and he's uncredited in Sink the Bismarck, I Was Monty's Double. He appears in the Sweeney and the Odin line in the 70s. And another, he has some roles in a big movie like that, but then they don't really seem to have many other big parts after. Then we have, as I mentioned, Cy Endfield plays Derek Bowden, the man who Ryker buys a flat from. Then finally, to round out the cast, Germaine Greer plays Clara Bowden, Cy Enfield's wife, in the movie, not at the time. She's also the Australian writer and lecturer, one of the leading faces of the feminist movement of the 60s and 70s, and her acclaimed work, The Female Eunuch, came out a year before the movie came out, so she was internationally known at the time. And this is her on-screen debut, and it's just it's refreshing to see a young Jermaine Greer. I think because I grew up seeing her on like Newsnight and things like that, and she always looked
that's a good
in her
point, actually,
50s, just because when I was born. But I was like, blimey, look, it's a young Jermaine Greer. You know, it's just an interesting face. I guess it's maybe the production going for a different angle, perhaps. You know, having an intellectual.
Honestly, I think what it was that people around the production and George were like, perhaps they were, friends talking to her, and they've, because I think George really went in for that counterculture, the protest movement and the hippie ideals, and perhaps he was moving in the same circles, and
he
Cy and George like pitched this movie where a mercenary comes good, and Jermaine thought that sounds interesting, and the film does include a lot of discussion of contemporary like political issues and protest movement, apartheid.
It goes all Thames Television open debate. If you've watched any vintage Thames Television, they do a lot of that in the 70s.
Kind of like Question Time.
Yeah, kind of like that. Yeah,
that sort
but
of
like
format.
A little bit more.
We'll talk about
can
that
actually have
sure.
an opinion. But yeah, it's
obviously going to be your favorite scene, isn't it, Rob?
It's a thing is all the cast are competent. Lazenby is good in the role. I just don't think they have a lot to work with, and I think that's very unfair to this good cast of character actors who can do a lot. Ben Carruthers as Jesse. He's almost the villain, but he's not. Mbote's almost the villain, but he's not. There's no defined protagonist antagonist, I think, and that's makes the movie difficult to digest at times. And we'll come to this later on, but I think let's have a palate cleanser from the madness of production and the cast. Let's get into the alley tally, because at least there is one with this movie.
It's time for Alley Tally on Fighting on Film.
So, Matt, your alley tally this week, because there is actually quite a lot going on.
There's a lot to talk about here with the alley tally.
Yeah, it's front loaded though, isn't it?
It is. If you're unfamiliar with the show and this is your first time listening, the alley tally is, of course, where we discuss all the cool kit, weapons, anything in the film that grabs our eye and is interesting to us.
The cool stuff, basically.
So I thought for a change, I'd start with some cars this week.
Ooh.
Because I was quite taken with George's Reliant Scimitar.
Yeah, what a car that
cuts
is.
about in.
Yeah.
Little four-door coupe. Okay.
It is to this film what the Ford Cortina is to the Sweeney, isn't it?
Yeah, or the Capri is to the
professionals.
Or the RS2000, yeah. So there's a nice little like chase sequence where they pick up some guns that they bought from an arms dealer, and the police stop them. And they've got a Sterling submachine gun on the parcel shelf in the back under a towel. Always put a towel down.
Yep.
They get pulled over. They can't let themselves get arrested because they haven't got any documents. There's a gun in the car. They need to go and oversee the transfer of the guns from a fleet of Avis vans.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. It's like an Avis advert. Yeah.
Beddies.
It's great. Bedford TK trucks. I'll get that in now.
There we go. Yeah. We'll come back to that. I'll let Rob handle it. So there's a little car chase, and there's like the chase by like a Rover Panda car. I think it's a Rover. Might be an Austin. I don't know. But the Scimitar gets thrown around a bit. There's a classic trope though, where the Scimitar goes down a narrow tunnel.
Yeah.
But the cop car is too wide for the narrow tunnel.
Right. Yeah, and they all try and get out of it, and it's like a cartoon. They're like, I can't get out. It's great. I love it.
It reminds me so much of a Professionals chase sequence.
Yeah, or a Sweeney. I think mention it again. The Sweeney. Yeah.
It just has that vibe.
There's no cardboard boxes knocked over though. Just a shame.
No, but there is a bit where like some milk gets like knocked off
Smashed.
A milk float.
It's great.
And I was like, ooh.
Yeah. I like the bit.
Budget for that was huge.
I like how they get that sterling in their car by mistake. Like one of the boxes falls over and all the sterlings get smashed and they come out on the floor, and you've got all these little, like, I don't know what it is about movies in the 70s, but every child is like portrayed as like a little oik, and all these children who go, oh, are they real guns, mister? Oh wow, look at him. Oh, what's that, a real gun? And you got like Lazenby and Carruthers trying to like stop the kids, and they bundle this sterling away. And that for me, that whole half an hour of the movie is the most grounded part of the film, and that feels like that original script.
Yeah,
and that gun running bit, and that's where the film's quite strong. But it's nice to see all these 70s era weapons and
and cars and stuff. I mean, later on there's a Porsche 911, which is pretty cool. Like someone rags their arse off that, getting out of that car park.
Yeah.
It nearly like drifts into a couple of parked cars. But he manages to like keep it going. Online.
Yeah. It's just very rare for us on the show. We've done so many war films that when we do Merc Month, sometimes we're afforded a little bit of a look at civilian life portrayed on film in action movies or something, which is very rare for us. I know we're doing Ronin later on in the month. I'm really looking forward to doing something just out of our ballpark. And this feels
big De Niro film.
Oh, definitely, yeah. This feels like an extended Sweeney episode at the start, or just the bits in the Sweeney or the Professionals where they're showing you like the life of the criminal in the first 20 minutes. Yeah, this feels like
10 minutes of,
an extend.
Every Professionals episode, the first 10 minutes are like the bit where they spend a bit of the budget.
Yeah.
And there's probably like
I expect George Jackson to come out at any moment going, Bodie, we've got a gun runner running around. That's not fucking Scottish. I expect George Jackson to come out and go, Bodie, we've got a gun runner in London.
Leave the Scottish accent in.
I'm not going to do it. Sorry, any Scottish listeners, but I do keep expecting George Jackson to come out and call up Bodie and Doyle to go and sort Lazenby out, which would have been an amazing episode of The Professionals anyway.
There is definitely a couple of Professionals episodes where gun running and the arms trade come into it.
Yeah, they do.
So there's definitely fertile ground where they could have had a FOF head cannon.
Yeah, I want it to be. I want it. But talking about,
as we mentioned, go on. Sorry.
No, talking about gun running. I mean, what a time to segue into some weaponry.
I know. So this film's really interesting because it does a really interesting portrayal of gun running, and not so much gun running, but the arms trade and arms dealers of the period, where the Rawlings character is essentially Samuel Cummings, who owned Interarms, and Samuel Cummings is predominantly known for being one of the most successful arms dealers of the 20th century. He ran a company that spanned multiple countries, had a massive warehouse in Manchester in the UK, right here, which was rumored to be able to hold enough small arms to equip a small army.
Wow.
Without exaggeration. And in the film, Lazenby and the other mercenaries and the African leaders that are hiring them, they go to this place called Orbit Arms International, which is a play on Cummings's Interarms.
Yeah.
And it's right down to like Rawlings's mannerisms and the stuff he says. So the first time you see his character, he's leading them in through the factory gates or the warehouse gates, and he says something like, a journalist asked me, like, do you not feel guilty selling all these guns to people and people die because you sell them? And he explains, a gun is an inanimate object. I just sell them.
Yeah, man.
I've got nothing to do with how people use them.
Yes.
And in preparation for this, I was like, I'll do a little bit of digging on Sam Cummings, because I immediately twigged that it was largely based on Sam Cummings, because he's this American businessman who dominated the arms industry of the period and made deals all across the world. And in doing a little bit of digging, as I mentioned, there's an interview with CNN from, I think, the early to mid 80s. And he almost word for word says what Rawlings says.
He does. You shared that with me. It's great.
He's like, they're an inanimate object, and he's there like in his office in Manchester, and he's holding like a letter opener, And he says, this lesser opener is an inanimate object, just like all the guns out there.
It's a great way to distance yourself from your your profession. It's amazing.
Fascinating character. He really was an interesting man. And the Rawlins character intrigued me because he has a whole diatribe in one of those sequences about M16s and how they're awful.
Oh, I knew you were going to bring this up. Yeah, it's amazing.
So one of the big things about M16s, early M16s in Vietnam was that they had a bit of a reputation for stoppages and failures.
Yeah.
And that mainly came from the type of ammunition that was issued with them and not training troops to properly clean them initially. That was all sorted out relatively quickly.
And myths about the AK-47 being prevalent as well, which didn't help.
Yeah, you'd have to clean it and all this kind of thing. Anyway, so Rawlins' character has this little monologue where he says there's, in the Far East, there's been GIs found clutched to their rifles and the VC have gotten to them and bayoneted them. And he talks about how he was subpoenaed by a House, a US Senate, probably.
Yeah, that's it.
Like committee meeting.
Lobbying committee or something. Yeah.
Something like that. I can't remember what he says exactly, but it's one of those big House committees that they have like experts and witnesses in. And he's asked his opinion of the M16 and he goes on a bit of a diatribe and he says, walks over to a rack and he picks up this rifle and he says, my recommendation to the average GI would be to, as soon as you can, if you come across one of these Tokarov STV rifles in the the VC are carrying, throw away your M16 and take up this fine rifle. And it's an incredible sequence.
It's weird.
It's so bizarre because it's got nothing to do with what that sequence or scene is about.
Yeah.
There's a number of these bits where there's like weird things that are inserted into the dialogue. Where
it's like they're trying to set Ryker up as this like guy who's been there and done it, but yet you never really think that he has. It's annoying because they want to set him up to have not a fall but a change of heart. But I never buy in the movie that he is this killer or he is this dude that's done this for so long. He doesn't feel like someone, like a Faulkner out of the Wild Geese who's been there, done it, and got the badges. He's not an Ian Yule type. Would know the weapons in and out, and that's fine. But to have these
that's
opinions,
what they're trying to do with him.
Yeah, but to have these opinions on firearms that don't really ring true even at the time, I don't think.
Yeah, no. I'll talk about that in a minute.
It's bizarre to me.
Well, Rawlins is there stood holding up an actual SVT-44, which is not an STV, but an SVT.
No,
which is
semi-automatic rifle,
Yeah, from the end of the Second World War, which I don't think the VC had many of. I think what they were trying to get at was like the SKS, the little
probably
carbine.
The SKS. Yeah, there was probably a few SVT-40s knocking around, but not many.
I would not be surprised, but I would be surprised if a lot of the VC had STVs.
A lot of them used M16s because they liked them because they were lightweight and the ammo was plentiful and you could sneak them through. You could leave them in places because American patrols wouldn't think they were VC weapons. There's a lot of reasons why it's a good weapon. It's very weird to me, and I know that at the time, obviously, they're probably buying into the whole, the Green Berets movie with John Wayne showing it to be a weapon you can smash on a tree and all that shit. But like,
it's the only time it's ever actually been one of those Mattel toys.
Exactly, so that's a hogwash. But I love that sequence in the.
It's great, isn't it? Because there's so much in it, and it supposedly represents the Interarms warehouse in Manchester, and it does have those racks and racks of guns, and guys are refurbishing stuff, and there's an ammunition manufacturing line.
Yeah,
and is it Simmons the character?
Timmerman,
that's right, and he tries to like espouse the M16.
Mr. Ryker.
Mr. Ryker, the Americans spent millions of pounds, millions of dollars.
Perfect for jungle warfare, Mr. Ryker.
Yeah. And like Lazenby is having none of it. He's like,
you don't want to know.
It falls in the mud. You have to send it back to the armorer.
I think his main gripe is the sort of fighting and the sort of men they're going to be training won't appreciate the technology that they have. So
he does say he wants to keep costs down because the type of men they're going to be working with will lose them. He says.
Exactly. And I think mainly
as they're walking through this warehouse full of guns, which I'm there like nose pressed against the monitor, like trying to see what's on the screen from this very poor like VHS rip that's online.
I know. But I like the fact they end up with boxes of Sterlings and M1 carbines, because if you read, like, I was reading like Soldier of Fortune magazines I found online that had been archived.
They're all on archive.org.
And it had like a conversation with an American mercenary who went over to Angola in the mid-70s, and he was saying how the guys that he would turn up with to train, he was armed with, like, I think he had like a grease gun or something. But they all had like M1 and M2 carbines, and some wouldn't even have magazines, and some guys wouldn't have cleaning kits and all these type of things. And it's like, well, if those weapons are prevalent in somewhere like that, then I think the movie, maybe even unintentionally, sort of did pick out a weapon that would have been perfect for that sort of situation. You can see it in historical things about that time.
Jumping off that, let's talk about some of the stuff we see in the film. So obviously in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, surplus was awash. It was everywhere. It was the peak period for being able to buy weapons cheap, and that goes for almost everything you can imagine. So in the film, there's a couple of really interesting sequences where they go out into the field and test some of the
it's
weapons,
almost in the first like 5-6 minutes of the movie. It's really quick.
That's some of the best scenes. Like, they pick George up from the airport. More about that coming up, and and they go off, and basically it's a picnic with guns,
pretty much.
Because George is there eating like a little sandwich. And he's watching some guys. They're like, one of them's running an L4 7.62 Bren. And then there's a couple of guys with FN mags, GPMGs. M240 if you're American. But essentially all the same gun. And George picks it up. He walks over to a guy, he's like scoffing his sandwich, kneels down next to the guy that's like prone firing this FN mag, and he says, "Keep going." And the guy like continues like giving it bursts, and downrange we get like little shots of them cutting in half like really racially charged
targets.
Like they're all like Asians and Africans, and it's kind of like, oh, okay,
doesn't age well.
No, it kind of comes into its purpose when Jesse walks over and says, "I can't wait to get back in the field," and we're doing that to real ones. And you're like, oh, Jesse's a fucking weirdo. Okay.
Jesse's the only character, just put a tangent in very quickly. Jesse's the only character who you feel is an actual mercenary who's done it before.
Yes. Yeah.
And he enjoys it.
He does a good job of conveying that he is over the edge.
He's the opposite of what I think Lazenby is, but Lazenby should be like that as well.
Yeah, he should be.
It would help his character at the start anyway.
So Lazenby's there watching this guy do it, and then he takes over, picks up the FM mag, folds the bipod down, and then gives it like the rest of the belt from the hip.
It's great.
And there's a dude stood behind him. I think it might be Timon, and he's like, "It's a good action. It's a great action. It's exquisite." And then George turns around and says, "The belt hanging out of it. I don't like the belt hanging out of it." So at that point, you're like, oh, okay, George prefers box magazine fed weapons. Okay.
George is a Bren man.
Yeah, George is a Bren man. And then there's a couple of sequences with hovercraft.
Oh, that's weird, isn't it? Yeah.
Which is kind of bizarre. So they go to another place where there are, and they almost look like the ones in the footage look like British Hovercraft Corporation hovercraft, and like sequences taken out of one of their like promo films. But then they go into like a marshy field and ride around in two, which are much smaller, and one's got like an FN mag mounted on the roof, and then two MG34s sticking out the side windows, because there's a sequence where they've clearly gone out to sea and fired like blank.
Have like a
sea. Just a B-roll cutaway stuff, and And then there's another one which is an ambulance variant. There's a little demo, and then George and Jesse. I keep calling him George. His name's Ryker in the film, but
Yeah. We always do. They default to actors' names.
I know. So they get in these hovercraft and go for a joyride, and then Jesse rear ends George and breaks off like one of the tail rudders, and George gets out and he goes, "What do you think this expensive piece of kit did?"
Yeah, it's great.
You're like, what has this got to do with this is amazing,
it's
but what
weird,
has this got to do with anything?
But I don't mind that bit.
The hovercraft are never mentioned again.
No.
It's almost like George and Cy were like, do you know what'd be cool? If we could like go and drive some hovercraft for a day.
Let's show the sort of cutting edge tech that could be available at the time and all that.
Just go and have a jolly with some hovercraft.
Yeah. I know. I'll talk about it in my final thoughts, but it's annoying. But my alley tally is, leather trench coats, moustaches. Mm-hmm. Everyone looks like proper Sweeney. I love it. And this is the thing, like Ryker in the role, he looks tough. He looks like he's been there, done it. He looks like he can handle himself. But his character doesn't seem that way. But yeah, as I say, he's got Bedford TK trucks, civilian ones. Always nice to see Beddies.
Cool.
Yeah, I like the inclusion of like BARs, just things you don't really see. An M1 Johnson rifle.
Oh yeah, the M1941 Johnson. Yeah.
Yes, which was like a sort of like, there aren't enough M1 Garands knocking about. We need something to stopgap or to maybe replace it, and it's a sort of like almost running alongside the Garand.
Yeah,
so that's right.
So the Johnson had a rotary magazine.
That's it.
And a long recoil action, which is very rare in rifles because the whole barrel moves.
Yeah.
And essentially, some of them were bought during the Second World War by
the Marines,
US Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Along with the light machine gun. But they never really took off. And then famously, they were provided to the guys that went in for the Bay Pigs operation.
Oh, okay.
In Cuba. So they were on the surplus market. So it's completely legit.
Yeah, but I think
they would be on the surplus market for them to be bought, and it's really interesting that they're in the film.
I think it's the only time I've ever seen them on screen in a movie.
I can't think of another one off the top of my head.
Blink and you'll miss it. And I also think that maybe
there's an M1 Garand right next to him as well.
Yeah, M1 Garand next to
which is nice.
Yeah, I like to think that in those scenes, it's what this guy's got that you can have for pretty cheap, and he's just giving a sort of demonstration of the different elements. All that seems great, showing all the kit and equipment.
Yeah, George shoots the head off a target.
That's
BAR,
pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
Do you think they're firing real ammunition in this movie?
At
any point? Or because if it's not, it's keyed up very well.
I think they could be. There's a bit where he dumps that belt from the mag, and it looks like it because they kind of do it over his shoulder.
Yeah.
And there's no BFAs on those. The quality of the footage isn't good enough.
No.
Sort of like see whether the stuff in the belt is blank.
Yeah, there's a great bit where Jesse lets rip with a BAR, which is quite funny, and Lazenby's reaction looks quite genuine. It's like, what are you doing? Yeah, it's great. Which makes me thought they might have been firing with real ammo.
Yeah, I would not be surprised. I mean, that would be interesting. There's a blink and you'll miss it shot of an M3 grease gun as well.
Oh yeah, there is right at the start, which is nice.
Yeah, and then the Sterling.
The Sterling is very prevalent. Yeah.
Which it's on the wall in the factory. They're transporting in the car. George Lazenby shoots a dog with one.
Oh Christ! Yeah.
I'm completely traumatized.
I'm going to talk about that in a minute.
Stop liking the Sterling submachine gun.
Interesting. This didn't make your book, Matt, when you wrote your book on the Sterling.
I didn't know that George Lazenby shot a dog with one, Rob. Otherwise, it would definitely have gone in my book. It's going to go in book 2. Available at all good bookshops.
Yes. Visit thearmorbench.com and you can get a signed copy.
You can. That's right, Rob.
There we go. We've not had a Sterling book mentioned for a while. Right. So maybe on that bombshell, we should go on to favourite scenes.
Hello, I'm Al Murray, and you're listening to Fighting on Film, the world's #1 war film podcast.
I'm going to take court on this one because Matt literally just mentioned it. It's the scene for me, and it's not a favourite scene.
It's the scene where they're talking about the politics. Is that the one?
No.
Is it the one where Jermaine Greer explains that she's been to a poetry reading?
No, it's fucking not.
Is it the extended frisbee sequence, Rob?
I will not be talking about any of those bits of
Is
the
it
movie.
the sequence where he goes and rents a
No,
flat?
it's not, because that's bizarre. You could edit that into an
Is it the bit
episode
where he shouts at his girlfriend for not cooking the tea?
No, it's not. None of that is any good.
Is it the bit where he goes to a Wimpy and has a sandwich?
Stop it.
Is it the bit where he goes to the park and watches some cross-country runners jogging?
Funny enough, it's not. It's the sequence with the Sterlings in the woods. So they take him in boat a riverbank.
That's pretty fucked up, Rob. That's a weird
No,
choice.
but I'll explain.
Okay.
It's not a favourite scene, but it's a scene for me where the movie changes.
No, I know where you're coming from with it. Carry on.
They take him, because I don't have a favourite scene really. I don't think any scenes in this are particularly great, because there aren't any really real scenes. It just sort of like meanders. So they're in this little clearing and there's a riverbank and they're showing him boat out of fire a Sterling. And he's obviously really enjoying it. They're trying to encourage him, get on his good side.
They're like throwing sticks up in the air to shoot and stuff.
And he's rattling away. And one of the guys, I think it's...
Shouldn't really hold the mag, but I'll let them off.
That's fine. It looks cool though, doesn't it?
It does.
There's a bit with, I think it's Bradshaw's dog. And dog's running around.
There's like a young guy who invites them to his country estate to like shoot guns.
For like no reason. It's not established
trying to
like
ingratiate themselves. He knows Jesse, but he's trying to ingratiate himself with them so he can go to Africa and be a mercenary.
Fly helicopters for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he's not established enough.
No.
So they're all having fun. And then they throw a stick in the air, and obviously the dog's getting excited because, a stick. Dog does what a dog does and runs in the river to get the stick. And George Lazenby accidentally wings the dog by mistake.
Yeah. Because he shoots the stick in the air and then he follows it down.
Yeah, and the dog runs in as
the dog's in the water.
Yeah, he hasn't got any chance to pull away. But then Jesse, just out of absolutely nowhere, riddles this dog with a whole mag.
Yeah, he does.
And
it's really hard.
It's bizarre and harrowing. Lazenby's saying, "What the hell are you doing?" Bradshaw doesn't seem bothered that his dog's been murdered.
He
bizarre.
Doesn't. It's bizarre. And it's never mentioned
doesn't
again.
Look bothered. But it's the scene where George Lazenby's character just goes really anti-war for like no reason.
George like dumps a mag into the ground in front of Jesse and forces him to fall into the water, doesn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And that's when the movie changes from like a mercenary film to an anti-war message, but it really bungles its anti-war message, because I think, as with most anti-war movies, you have to show war at least once or twice to get the message across. You look at the greatest anti-war movies going, like Path of Glory, Full Metal Jacket, countless others in there. They do show war at their core. They are war movies. They do have strong anti-war messages, but you have to show, not tell. And this movie does a lot of telling, don't do a lot of showing. And that's where and I'll stop there, because that's where my issues with the movie start, because Final Thoughts is going to maybe go deep this week.
Yeah.
But that for me is a pivotal sequence, and it's probably one of the better filmed in the movie as well, because it's actually trying to establish.
I hope no dogs were harmed in the film.
No, I don't either.
I'll be honest, because I wasn't expecting it, and
it does hit you hard. The films give it its merits. It does hit hard,
and I think it does kind of throw Lazenby's character over the edge, and I think that is important. And as you say, I think it is that turning point of the film. But yeah, I've already talked about one of my favorite scenes, which was that scene with the Samuel Cummings character, which is
cool. Yeah.
That underpins that whole the commercial, capitalist side of war really nicely. But as I mentioned, there's a couple of other sequences in there where George and Jesse play frisbee for a really long time. Which has to be one of the earliest on-screen debuts of the frisbee.
Yeah, probably.
I can think of. Like they go into the back garden.
Like absolute fucking pros as well.
Yeah, they've spent a lot of time playing frisbee, Rob. Like, more time. All that time they should have been like spending writing dialogue. And working out what the film was actually about. Literally, George was just out there with Jesse playing fucking frisbee.
That's not film for the movie. That's just B-roll footage of them between takes.
Yeah, it's just like Cy's been like, actually, can you go and get some footage of George and Jesse playing frisbee? I need about 20 minutes worth. I'm going to ADR the shit out of
Up
it.
in Hyde Park, yeah.
Yeah, put a lot of dialogue over it, and that's going to be most of the exposition for the back end of the movie.
Fuck's sake.
Because the entirety of them explaining that they're going to like hold the weapons to ransom is all added over that sequence. And it's bizarre. And then there's a sniper part as well. So they're in the park, they're in Hyde Park.
Smallest sniper sequence.
Like throwing a frisbee. And how George knows there's a sniper looking at them, I don't know.
It's because he's Ryker.
True. It's the mercenary spider senses tingle. And at that point, I got excited because I thought the film was going to like kick a notch, you know.
Yeah.
I think we were going to get a little bit more plot and action. But
it'd been cool if he'd pulled a gun and shot through the frisbee and got the sniper.
It would have been cool if he'd thrown the frisbee at the guy and it'd like
that'd been cool.
And they'd escaped.
Yeah, that'd been cool.
I almost for a moment thought that was going to happen, but it didn't.
Oh, fuck's sake.
So
God forbid the movie show Ryker killing anyone. Fuck me. It's a mercenary film. I almost expect it, but it never fucking happens. So I'm getting annoyed already. Oh my God.
I did say to you, didn't I? Like I was watching it about maybe half an hour ahead of you. And I was like,
I know.
Rob, I don't think they're going to go on the mission, Rob.
It's a wild ride. Yeah.
Because you get to like the halfway mark and you go, yeah, they're not going to Africa in this. There's no way.
Yeah.
This is going to resolve.
It reminds me of that bit in the
midwinter London,
where Milhouse is upset they're not going to go to the fireworks factory. That's how we felt in this. Whereas, where are they going to go on the mission? They never went on the mission.
So yeah, so they basically they continue throwing the frisbee back and forth, and George says, "There's a sniper. We need to dive into the riverbank and escape." So they do that.
Yeah,
and it cuts away once they get onto the bank.
And you're like, away.
How did George see that? Anyway, that's not my favorite scene. I just had to mention that because it's insane.
He lays
the amount of frisbee. The amount of frisbee in this film is off the charts.
It's too much.
It's insane.
Too much frisbee.
There's another great sequence where George goes for a walk in the park, and you're like, oh, what's he doing? Because he meets this very young girl at a party, and he says, can I call you up? And she's like, yeah, go on then. I'm at school tomorrow, and I'm like, oh my God.
Oh Christ, yeah. This is the most unbelievable dodgy relationship in movies.
There's already a bit where like Jesse tries to pick up two schoolgirls in school.
Oh, Jesus Christ, yeah.
Which is like, what is going on?
I think he's just trying to show you that the moral compass of these guys is just all over the shop because of what they do.
Absolutely.
But he's just handled horrifically.
Yeah, it's wild. George is at a loose end, so he goes for a walk around the park. He hasn't got anyone to play frisbee with, so he's on his own. And
it's his biggest arc of the movie, not having any other frisbee companions.
There's some melancholic music over the top of it.
Yeah.
And I was like, is there going to be like someone going to come and like try and assassinate him? Is Jesse going to find him in the park? But no, nothing happens. We just cut away to the next sequence.
Yeah.
Which is a perfect illustration of a lot of this film. There's a lot of vignettes that do nothing to push.
Just don't go anywhere. Yeah.
I also really love the bit in the customs office at the very beginning of the film, which is incredible. It's an incredible way to start a film.
It really is.
So there's a cool sequence of George walking down like a terminal corridor. There's a bit of the theme tunes playing, like Ryker's on the road and all this sort of thing. And he gets to the customs desk and he opens up his briefcase, and the customs officer looks in. It's when customs officers were still like dressed in naval officers' uniforms and stuff.
Yeah, man. Peak 70s.
And he goes, oh, okay, you have to come through to this back room, and it's to basically George is carrying like a Colt Cobra or Python or something, like a big revolver.
Yeah, revolver. Yeah.
And he's gone like hand it over and check it in, and then he'll get it when he leaves the country. And they get into this customs office in the back, and there's a stop the war protester. He's being strip searched by another customs officer, and George is left waiting in the room because the same guy that's about to do a cavity search, Rob, is also going to write George a receipt gun.
Yeah.
So the dude's like the actor that plays the protester is selling it, like perfectly well acted scene. just really bizarre. So
It's just
he's
weird.
there, and the customs officer turns to him and says, "Okay, strip off, take your underpants off." And the dude does it, and then he's seen like lubing up a finger.
Yeah.
Puts away to Lazenby, who
Christ, we've really taken the fucking podcast to weird new places this week.
we really have. And
sorry, listeners.
There's
just
some
not
of
much going on in this
Lazenby's
movie.
reactions where I feel like he didn't know that was going to happen in that
Probably
scene.
not.
Because he does look genuinely confused about what's going on, and
he really does.
Slightly amused. It's like Cy has written that scene, and he said, "George, go into the office
and just react,
just be in the scene, act as you would react, and we'll capture it on camera." So George goes in, stood there with his briefcase. Fella's got he's not put a glove on, Rob, because this is the 70s, and gloves weren't
why not
necessary back then. So he's lubing up a finger, and then the guy sort of like, it cuts back to the stop the war chap, and he's got a stop the war sticker on his bum cheek.
Just bizarrely, yeah.
And then the next, there's a bit of a harsh cut reaction from George, some noises from the dude. And then the dude goes, "That was really nice. Enjoyed that." And George is like, "Okay."
That whole sequence is bizarre to me because later on in the film, the movie's trying to really sell the anti-war guys to you. Yeah. But in the start, it makes a mockery of the guy.
It does. It belittles them as being kooks.
Yeah, I really don't understand it. Because it's not like Lazenby goes full kooky.
No.
I don't, because
then the guy takes Lazenby's gun off him and starts waving it around, going, "You could hold up the entire airport with this." And he's like, George is there, like, it's not loaded. You wouldn't get very far with that.
Leave it alone. Yeah.
Yeah. He's kind of like, I didn't know this was going to happen.
And that guy just took like a tab of LSD off the policeman.
Yeah, like the customs dude's like looking at his ring, has him open the ring, and then he takes the tab out and puts it on his tongue and smiles at him and then walks out.
I'm like, arrest him. He's just taking drugs in front of you.
It's bizarre.
It's bizarre. It's a fucking weird sequence. Yeah, I get why it's your favourite, because it's just so bizarre.
It's truly odd.
This movie is fucking...
But on that note...
This movie's like a fucking psyops. Operation Ultra lads in fucking Nam should have used this. They should have blared this out on their fucking Hueys driving around. So I think maybe moving on to final thoughts this week, and boy, oh boy.
What do you think of the film, Rob?
Oh, fucking hell. If you haven't worked out so far, listeners, I'm not a big fan. So usually I can like say, yeah, I recommend it. Go and give it a watch, But I can't really recommend this one this week, guys. I'm really sorry. The first half of the movie shows real promise, and it loses its way just so drastically. There's ways that you could mold this movie to go where you want without straying away from the core, which is it should be a movie about these hard, tough men coming to terms with maybe the men that they're working for, the causes that they're supporting aren't actually good. That should be your message, right? And there's one line where I felt you could have established on this, but they don't. So Ryker and Jesse are in Riker's hotel room, and Jesse has some pictures of some atrocities they've committed, and he's kept them. And there's one line I think they should have really adapted on it. And Ryker says to him, "Do you need to keep those? I've got it all up here." And he taps his head.
That's a good line. Yeah, I thought that too.
That's enough for me, because he's been having flashbacks. And this is where my whole thing comes in. You need to show Ryker having done that, or show him then go on to do that, and him have a change of heart maybe in the field and not being able to do anything about it, or something. And it would
just a little flashback.
Just a little flashback sequence. If he once felt really good about doing these things and now he's not. And then this whole meandering middle section where the movie absolutely grinds to a halt and sags, where he meets the anti-war guys. That could be great if they would present him as like, oh, look, here's this mercenary guy, and he doesn't like war. Oh, wow. Like, they could really have gone over the top with him and used him as like a front, maybe. I don't know.
Just to explain that part of the film, because I don't think many people have watched this.
No, I don't think so.
There's basically after that sequence where he goes, "I've got them all up here." Ryker gets in a taxi, goes around London. There's a little sequence where they're like watching the guards march past.
That's it.
And he says tin soldiers, and the cabbie's like, no, they got a fine war record.
I've got a fine war record, they have.
Without people like them, you and I wouldn't be here
without him.
He says, and George says, where do the real people live? And the guy takes him to Carnaby Street, apparently, or Portobello Road.
Portobello Road. Oh, you mean people like your types? Or something.
So he takes George to meet the hippies because George has long hair and a mustache, and he's in a pub, which I believe, in some of the source material we saw was Finch's, which was frequented by mercenaries a little bit.
Mercenary, yeah.
But in the film, it's frequented by counterculture, stop the war, just left-wing hippie types. And George meets his manager there, who is playing sort of a stop the war campaigner.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, "Do you know of anywhere that's renting?" And he gives him the address of Cy Enfield's character in the film. And who's that dude that just turns up?
I have fucking no idea.
While George is having the, viewing the flat.
Yeah, I have no idea. No idea. I think it's
some
implied
random dude turns up.
I think it's implied that it's one of the anti-war people who's going to go and do this performance piece, and then it's going to become this lecture. But no one's established. It's not. He meets that guy in the pub too quickly. We're not informed about who he is. They don't have a formal sit-down conversation like you would in any other film. They, go, what do you do for a job? Even there's a bit that could have even got to that when he's talking to Jermaine Griggs. And you know what? I don't actually know. It's like, yes, you fucking do. You fucking mercenary. You kill people for money. Just tell her that. Be blunt about it. That was the film's opportunity for him to speak about his emotions, and he never does. No, it's so irritating. And this is my whole thing.
Enfield's character does a load of exposition about where he's from. Like, we find out more about Enfield's character than anyone else in the film. He's an American expat that lived here, lived there, lived here.
Yeah.
And then moved to England, and it's like, okay.
If the movie wanted to say that Lazenby is just a victim of his circumstances, and he's doing it as a job, and that's just a job to him, and he isn't that intellectual to realize what he's doing is wrong until it's too late, and that could have been something. He could have had an epiphany so many ways, but it's so blunt with his change. And even when he's chatting to Jesse right at the end, he doesn't know what the woman is talking about who he's now a girlfriend with. He openly admits, he's like, oh wow, get that for a take. Oh wow, it's like he's he's got, oh wow, man, I'm a cool cat now. I don't like any war. And it's like, but there's no change. He meets
his girlfriend. She moves in within like 3 days after like one
he goes
date.
All fucking super hands at a peep show for no fucking reason.
He kind of does, doesn't he? And there's a telling sequence where he's on a date with the girl.
Yeah.
And then she asks him something. She gives some money to a beggar, and he says, in certain parts of Africa, if you'd done that, a dozen more would have jumped out of the woodwork and followed you home. And she says, why'd you say that? And he says, I knew a man. I thought this was a good scene, actually. I knew a man who did that, and he would goad them back to his home, and he would kick them to death. Firstly, my reaction was, Jesus Christ, George, you're on a date. What are you doing? Then I was like, the man is probably like either a friend of his.
Lines, does George?
Yeah, I know, right? Must try that one. Right, wow. The guy is either possibly Jesse, another friend, or maybe even George himself.
Yeah.
And I thought that scene was shocking and interesting, but again, a small blip on like a series of weird vignettes.
Instead of having all these meandering nowhere scenes, have a few flashbacks. Spend your money. Don't spend your money on hovercraft that don't mean anything. You could use stock footage. Spend your money on maybe like maybe a studio set that looks like a jungle, and have George gunning people down. Use that. Show us him doing it. Show, don't tell. And this is where this movie really upsets me, because it could have been something, but it's just not. And I don't know who's to blame. I think maybe Cy Endfield is. I think maybe Lazenby's just maybe not. He doesn't know the industry as much. Yeah. I was put in my final comments. It's like Enfield's direction's rudderless. Lazenby has very little to do. I often don't want to not suggest a movie, but I don't think I can with this one. I don't think there's anything really redeeming about it, other than the fact that it's a little curious little British independent film from the early 70s. And if you're a Lazenby fan, if you like Bond, maybe check this out.
The main reason most people would watch it is that, basically.
Yeah, I don't usually apologize for optioning a movie for the podcast, but this week I'm sorry that we've had to put ourselves through this because I genuinely can't think of anything nice to say about it. It's really, really bizarre.
So for me, I mean, I completely understand the feeling, Rob. I do. I know what you mean, but I think it's a little bit more interesting than that. I think there's some stuff going on here that's interesting. I mean, firstly, I just wanted to give you a couple of quotes that Lazenby said post-production.
Right.
In 1973, he told the Australian Women's Weekly magazine, on Universal Soldier, I was involved in the production, the writing, and even a bit of direction. I don't think I'm good enough. I don't think I'm a good enough actor to get fragmented like that on a job. Now I can give my full concentration to acting and hope it will be good and lead to other roles. So as early as like late 73, he knows that movie is not good.
It bombed, yeah.
And that a lot of the reasoning behind that was because A, he was too fragmented and there was no real strong vision behind the film that guided it to a point where it got across the lofty ideals they wanted to convey.
Yeah,
I think. And in the past, I think in like maybe 2000, 2001, 2002, he described the film as silly.
Yeah, I'll give
he
him
literally
that.
described it as silly.
And
I know we didn't include a retro review this week, but the Dilys Powell of the Sunday Times said, I'm glad to recommend this story, a notable performance in the lead role by George Lazenby. Relaxed, reflective, but solidly resolved, very different from that misfire a year or two ago as James Bond.
Ooh.
I don't know what film that Dilys watched, but I don't think it was the one that we did.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Maybe she didn't like him as Bond. Maybe she preferred him as this.
Maybe. I mean, she obviously really didn't like him as Bond. But
No.
There's no resolution in this film, really, because the way the film ends is Jesse realizes that George is now a pacifist, which has happened within the last week. He won't fight. He won't go all in on the plan to steal the money from the other mercenaries and the Africans that have tried to hire them. And he's disappointed by the amount of money that they've been given by the African leader. And they have a fight in a motorway lay-by. And it's a massive anticlimax.
Such a damn squib.
Essentially, Jesse pushes him a few times, hits him with the briefcase, punches him, and he rolls down an embankment. And over the top of it, they've put like a thunderclap.
Ka-dang, 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 and it's like,
and it's slowed down, and it's
so awful.
Are they? And you can tell that they're trying their damnedest to make this a climax.
And it's really not.
It completely is not. And it concludes with George trips Jesse, hurts his ankle.
That's it.
But then pacifist George helps Jesse up and takes him back towards the motorway. When a Rolls appears that is, I guess, contains roll-ins.
Yep.
And then it's implied through freeze frames and gunshot sounds.
Yeah.
That the two of them are shot dead by roll-ins. Why roll-ins would do that, I don't know. Because I assume he would already have been paid for the guns.
Yeah, it's just bizarre, isn't it?
So really, it should have been like the African leaders that were doing that.
Unless Mbote told him to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Perhaps so.
There's not enough going on. There's not enough set up for that ending to work in any way.
No. And it wasn't the ending that Lazenby wanted either, because he told, again, Australian Women's Weekly,
what a publication.
Favorite magazine.
Allegedly.
They'd finished the main shoot, and he was back in Australia for a bit, and he was going to go back and shoot the ending and edit the film and, work out production, publication and promotion and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "No one yet knows how the film will end. When I get back from Australia, we shall edit, fit the music, and have everything but the last shot in the can. Then, about 3 days before the film is shown, we want to stage a real demonstration in the seat. Let me do it again. We'll stage a real demonstration in the street, which I assume is going to be like an anti-war, or was going to be an anti-war demo. Mingle actors with it. Cy will shoot it, and this will be the end scene of the film. By doing it this way, it will be absolutely up to date. It must be current if it is to have the impact that we want. Then the audience will really be involved with present history." So it seems that George was envisaging this grand statement about perhaps stop the war, just a peace-orientated demo.
Yeah.
It was going to be filmed by Enfield and was going to feature in the film, but that never happened. And I think the reasoning behind this is the film ran out of money. They brought in the Ionian company, who stumped up another 10 grand, and they rushed the end of the film. And that end sequence was reportedly filmed on the Cranford Parkway interchange in Middlesex, and we got what is quite possibly the most anticlimactic ending of a film I've seen in quite some time. I would conclude by saying I think there's a really, really fascinating parallel between Lazenby walking away from Bond and Ryker walking away from being a Merc.
Oof. Yeah.
So
maybe
it doesn't quite work, and it doesn't quite work, and it doesn't quite pan out for either of them. But I can understand why George wanted to move away from Bond, and why that whole period of counterculture, and why he might have thought that at the time that the establishment that Bond and Fleming and the Bond films represented was coming to an end, and there was more to be said about peace, progressive thoughts, theories, politics, that kind of thing. And in hindsight, we can go, George, what were you doing? Why did you do this?
I know, right?
Why would you give up a good earner like Bond? Because
it must have had his reasons.
It might seem like a good idea. I just feel like the film had some interesting ideas at some point, but the series of vignettes and the mood of the film just isn't cohesive enough to get them across. It's well shot. I really like the arms deal sequences. They're quite fascinating. Lazenby is capable. It all becomes rudderless when the script disappears.
It really does.
If thought out, it could have been, a very effective commentary on conflict and progressive politics and protest and human growth and the arms trade.
Even something like Who Dares Win says more about the anti-war movement than this does.
It kind of does, but I mean, as it stands, it falls largely flat.
Yeah,
and it's more of a a curiosity than a fully formed piece of cinema.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I think that's it, really. I apologise to anyone who might have watched it in anticipation, expecting something a lot more. But there we have it. Next week, Mercenary Month 2 keeps going. We have another canon picture for you. We love doing Platoon Leader so much. We thought we'd pick another canon film, 1988 Mercenary Fighters. And it stars Peter Fonda, James Mitchum, and Red Brown, among others. So, yeah, and that's very more in the mould of a classic actioner, rather than this movie. But it does have its moments. So, and we'll catch you again next time.
Thanks for listening, guys. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.